night may be long and the dark may be deep, but the answers are there to be found. Whether it's the normal, the abnormal, or the paranormal, you're in the right place. Let's go beyond reality.
Welcome to the show. I didn't hear anything when I started. Very, very strange, but it sounds okay now. Welcome, everybody. Good to have you along with us. We've got a very, very interesting story tonight to talk about. Our guest, Martin Sawa, will be talking about his book. And if I can grab it here, I can show it to you if you're watching the stream. It's called The Other Side of Success. And part of this journey is a very, very spiritual one. And it's one of great discovery for Martin. And I'm excited to, and honored actually, to have him here to share it with us. So looking forward to that. Before we bring him on, though, I want to remind you to do all the things you need to do, which is subscribe to the channels if you're not already subscribed. YouTube, Twitch, wherever you happen to be watching, or both. Look for the podcast version of the show as well. Very easy to find in any podcast platform. Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify. I think we're on iHeartRadio. All the main, podcast places. Find it. It's called Beyond Reality Paranormal on the podcast platforms. Also, be sure to find us on Facebook and follow the pages there as well. I think that's all the housekeeping we have to do. Good to see everybody in the chat. Thank you for joining us. I always appreciate you being there and supporting the program. So thank you very much. So we'll take a quick break. When we come back, we will bring our guest in. Again, tonight we'll be talking with Martin Sawa about his book. It's called The Other Side of Success, and you're going to be quite surprised. It's quite a journey, quite a process, and quite a story. So buckle up, get ready. It's going to be a great night. It's Beyond Reality, and we'll be right back.
Hey, it's JV here. You know I've asked for your support in the past, and I'm going to do it again because it's really, really important. And there are a couple of ways you can support the show, and it's so inexpensive. Now, you can go to Patreon, and you can become a Patreon supporter, and we really, really encourage that. But there's also another way. If you look at the description of the podcast, if you're a podcast listener, and you scroll down to the bottom, there's a way to support the show directly through the podcast app. And it's only 99 cents a month. It's less than $1. You probably have that change in your couch right now. That $1 a month, less than $1, goes a long way in helping us produce this program, provide great interviews for you during the course of the week. I thank you in advance because the support is so important to the program.
Again, thank you for joining us tonight. I'm very, very excited about our guest tonight. We're going to be talking to Martin Sawa. He is an author. He also is a paranormal medium believer, and you will understand why as the story progresses. He's the author of a book called The Other Side of Success. It's actually his memoirs. And it's a very interesting journey. Martin, welcome to Beyond Reality. It's really an honor to have you with us tonight.
Well, thank you, JV. It's really great to be here.
You know, your story is a complex one. It's also very diverse, very varied. You tell it beautifully in the book, The Other Side of Success. We're going to talk a lot about a tragic part of this story, your story, but it's also a very redeeming part of your story. But before we get into that stuff, why did you decide to write a memoir to begin with?
I had dropped out of the commercial real estate business, which was my primary occupation as an entrepreneur for most of my adult life, and just decided to take some time off and do some things I had wanted to do. And had started writing, wrote some screenplays, some essays, and then a developmental editor I was working with said, "Why don't you write a memoir?" And I thought it was kind of narcissistic, and didn't want to do a vanity project. But the more I thought about it, the characters that I knew and the experiences I had were often more interesting than what I could conjure up in a fictional world. So I decided to go ahead, and it took me a few years, but in retrospect, I'm glad I did it.
The story is, as I said in the beginning, quite varied, quite complex, quite interesting too, because you've had ups and downs throughout your life. As I said, we're going to get into the a part of your life that was rather tragic, but it also led you to some redemption. But before that, how would you describe your life as an entrepreneur? Do you think you were happy? Were you obsessed with, making, the next sale? A lot of entrepreneurs, including myself, have felt that before. How would you describe your life before you took a step back to look at it?
My journey was maybe a little different than most people. I grew up in a little town in Wisconsin. My parents immigrated from the Ukraine after World War II and arrived with 2 suitcases and my older sister. So I always had to kind of scrap to, compete. And then I moved out to California after college and worked as a city planner and hated my job. And one day I just quit. And I didn't know what I was going to do, but I knew I was never going to go back to that life, and I was going to work for myself. So I got into commercial real estate, first as a broker, then an operator, and I invented myself one last time as a developer. And this was in San Francisco and Oakland and Los Angeles, selling, high-rise office buildings, shopping malls, things like that. So it was an interesting life, and, but it's very competitive. And when you work for yourself, every year the counter is reset to 0. And if you work half as hard, you don't make half as much. You make nothing. So it consumed a lot of my time and attention. But then my personal life got more complicated and interesting, and it was a journey of its own.
Yeah, I want to talk about that journey. One of the things that you put in the description of yourself is that you're now a paranormal medium believer. We're going to talk about the story that made you a paranormal medium believer, but first tell us who Anita was, because Anita, obviously, a very important part of the story.
Anita was my second wife. We married, I met her in 1991, and at that time I was about 40 years old. And prior to meeting her, had no real contact in any regard with the world of the paranormal. And after we met and later married, I discovered she had what I would call powers, and we began to experience anomalous and synchronistic events. And that opened my eyes to this other world. And then later, we met a psychic, and that ratcheted up a notch.
Yeah, before we get into that part of the story, tell us about what you feel, especially now in retrospect, what Anita's gifts were. What type of sensitivities and spiritual gifts would you say Anita had?
I can just give you examples because I haven't tried to classify them, but when she later told me after I observed her, she told me that in high school she had been bullied by a girl, and then one day told her that she had tuberculosis, and the girl was upset and didn't know, but in fact 2 weeks later was diagnosed.
Oh, wow.
And so after that, people at school kind of tended to leave Anita alone.
Yeah.
And she realized she had a gift, but she was religious and knew it was a gift from God, and so had to, deal with it appropriately. And we had incidents where she met strangers on the street who would then consult with her for 10, 15 minutes, and she believed these were angels and were giving her direction in life. And we encountered an imp and sort of otherworldly being, and that kind of shook me up, but to her it was old hat. So we had these kind of, I don't know how you would describe them, but events which, as I stated in the book, if it just happened once, I just write it off as kind of interesting or strange or coincidental. But when it kept recurring, I felt that there was something more beyond the veil.
Yeah, sure. When Anita had these encounters with strangers that she would consult with or would consult with her, what she later said that she felt they were angels. Were you with her at any of those times?
Yeah, but I was not participating. So I would observe her. Like one time we went to the grocery store and I was waiting in the car in the parking lot and just kind of saw her talking. It was like this woman looked like a homeless woman in rags, and they talked for probably 15, 20 minutes. But with the interaction with the imp, I was a direct participant in that.
Let me ask you a follow-up on the angel encounter first. Did Anita come away from that? Like you said, you were out in the car in that particular instance. Did she come back and say to you at that time, I just had a conversation with an angel? Or is this something that became realized to you later?
Well, I kind of had to pull it out of her. I said, you know that person? She said no. And I said, well, what'd you talk about? And then she described she was having some issues dealing with her family. And later I came, and I think she did call them angels later on.
And tell us about the imp encounter.
Well, we had to go see our insurance broker, and it was a Saturday morning. So we drove. He had the office in one of these kind of older office parks, and he was the only business open that day. And when we pulled up, there was another car. Not his car, but another car with this young girl, probably maybe 6 years old, sitting in the passenger seat, and no adults around. And she had carrot hair and jagged teeth, and resembled really an old soul. Mm. And she began to engage us in conversation, but put Anita on the spot, and it got a little weird. So I was kind of ushering Anita away and just whispering to her, and the imp, of course, could hear everything and was kind of replying to me. And so I took her into the broker's office, and I asked the broker who else was he seeing, and he said, well, there's nobody else out there. So he went out and looked, and the imp was gone. And wow. I kind of ran down the street and looked around, and and so. So
when as it was happening, you recognized it as a strange encounter, but you didn't recognize it as a what may be considered a supernatural encounter at the time until it disappeared.
Well, upon the first encounter, I never met anybody that a young child that effectively looked.
Yeah,
and spoke and acted as an adult, not just like a child actor, but
yeah.
So I already there was something.
Yeah, you knew going
on.
You knew,
and then when she disappeared, that confirmed it.
Yeah. So what do you think? What do you think that imp was after? What do you think the intention was?
Anita thought in imps they're not like really malevolent spirits. They're more Anita described.
They're mischievous. They're mischievous.
Her as an instigator.
Yeah, mischievous.
Yeah, mischievous. And Anita cautioned me that if we were really operating from the dark side, I'd really know it. And so I just kind of let it go at that. And
yeah, but it's not the type of encounter a lot of people have. It's very rare, obviously. So I'm curious, do you think it was because of Anita's sensitivities that this imp approached you?
Yeah, that's a big part of it. Yeah. I don't know if these things are happening all the time, but most people aren't attuned.
Right.
Or in touch.
Right.
Or if she had singled Anita out because she knew Anita had the perception to understand who she was.
I think that's one of the things that I've learned with having so many conversations on this program with people who have had experiences that, a lot of people are they have blinders on, and when they have those encounters or those experiences, they just completely don't recognize them. So they may be more common than we let on or than we're aware of because of that.
I believe that's the case.
Yeah. So was as you again look back on Anita's sensitivities, her awareness, and her beliefs, this was all based in her religious spirituality, right?
Yeah, and it was hard for me to process at first because religiously, I grew up in a Catholic household. I was an altar boy as a child, and then I went to a Jesuit high school, which was the best education I had in my life.
Yeah.
I learned far more than I did in college or later in life intellectually. But after high school, I kind of fell away. So by the time Anita and I met, I wasn't practicing, and then, still had a belief in God or higher power, but it didn't really affect my life at all. Anita grew up in the rural South. Her mother was Pentecostal and very religious, and her dad was less religious but very morally upright. And Anita didn't go to the church, but she read the Bible every night and wrote her own exegesis and kind of walked the walk and practiced what she preached. And she didn't proselytize, but people knew she would always have friends coming over seeking advice and counsel, that they knew she operated from a higher level. So once we were together, I got to participate in this world, and it started to open my eyes. But at the same time, I was immersed in work,
yeah,
and all the distractions and temptations that go with that.
Yeah. So as you're living your life, you're going along here, you actually have an opportunity to go into what I read as like a psychic gallery reading or a medium's gallery reading with a bunch of people. And you ask Anita to go, and she's hesitant, right? I mean, this is the beginning of your introduction with Mary Jo, right?
Yeah, this is now about 5-6 years later. It's in the later 90s, and we're living in Los Angeles at the time. And I don't know what made me go, because, again, even up till that time, I had no contacts with psychics or any sort of paranormal experiences other than what I was experiencing with Anita.
Right.
But I saw that there was a psychic who was having an introductory sort of seminar, and it was at the Hollywood Holiday Inn, of all places. And something made me want to go. And so I asked Anita, and we had never even discussed psychics, and I assumed it would be of high interest to her. But on the contrary, because of her religious beliefs and biblical readings where psychics are not dealt with positively, she was extremely reluctant. And finally, I kind of cajoled her, and she went with me, and we went, and that's when we met Mary Jo.
And you were in that session, and I think that you went into it thinking this is going to be entertaining. These people are all entertainers, not necessarily serious spiritualists. And things started to happen in this particular session that changed your mind.
Yeah, I didn't really know what to expect. And because, again, it was kind of contrary to my outlook to want to go at all. But I thought it may be someone who would be fairly adept, but just ask kind of general questions and do a cold read or whatever. And it was almost like watching stage magic, trying to see how they did it.
Right.
That was probably my state of mind. And so we went there, and there's maybe 30 people in the room, and it's a small conference room, and Mary Jo comes out, and she looks like a suburban housewife, which she was, and she sits on a stool and is very pleasant and says, when I go in trance, I'll go down the row and describe to each person something that may be troubling them or uppermost on her mind. And my suggestions for how to respond to it. So it wasn't about telling fortunes or making predictions. It was dealing with human suffering. And so she went into trance, and now she sounds like, I call it a disembodied Irish brogue.
Mm-hmm.
And now I'm kind of like elbowing Anita, and she's just rolling her eyes. And so Mary Jo talks to the first person, a guy in the front row, and she reveals something with such clarity, a personal secret. And you could tell when the guy heard it, he was like visibly shaken. And now everybody's kind of getting a little nervous and edgy because this isn't what they expected.
Right.
And she went down the road, and, by the fourth person, everybody just stunned silence. And I'm wondering if she got 29 other people with shills.
Yeah.
Or what's going on. And when she got to us, she got to Anita first, and she talked to her about her brother who had drowned many years ago, who they were very close with, and gave details of that relationship, things I didn't even know. And Anita's just like speechless. And so now I'm saying, well, she's going to get to me and she's going to tell everybody what a bad person I am. And she took it easy on me. I had a surgery coming up, and she just, reassured me with regard to that, and she kept going. And so when we walked out, everybody's quiet, totally quiet, and we get to the parking garage, and the first person she talked to, we see the guy get in his car, and he backs it up into one of the concrete columns, and then just takes off. He was that shaken.
Wow.
So that was probably the moment when I thought, I don't know what she just did or how she did it, or it doesn't really matter what you call it. There is something there. There's something there.
Yeah, you were impressed by this, but you still thought maybe there was some trickery involved. Didn't you start researching paranormal topics, paranormal, showmanship, if you will, trickery, ways that these people might be able to fool folks in the audience?
Well, right afterwards, for probably the next 6 months, I didn't even think about it because I was so busy at work. It's kind of like this life where you go and negotiating these large deals with people whose names you see in the paper, and it just required so much concentration and energy that I didn't have the time to even devote to this. And then my circumstances changed, and I had some free time. So I began to, study the lives of psychics, and I subscribed to Skeptic magazine, and just learned more about stage magic. Did everything I could to debunk the premise, and I came away from that. And my way of dealing with life in most cases, no matter if it was business or other pursuits, was to just put what I call skin in the game.
Right.
If it was in business, to risk time and money and reputation and take risks and do it and find out for myself. So that's what I did in studying about psychics. And Mary Jo, then, this was towards the end of the year, she had a retreat in the Florida Panhandle by the beach. And so Anita and I went to that, and we got to know her a bit more. And Anita found that she was a good Christian woman and didn't operate from the dark side, and still was kind of unsure how she was going to integrate this information into her religious beliefs. But we got to talk to her, and I came away after that saying she has something of value, perhaps of great value, to communicate. And I determined at that time that probably most people who label themselves as psychics or mediums or whatever expression you want to use probably weren't that highly skilled, or in some cases probably fraudulent. But that there was probably a tiny minority of people who were truly gifted and that highly skilled and operated from the right side, so to speak, and could really help me with my life. And that's when I became a believer.
Now, when you went to this retreat that Mary Jo was having, you and Anita, the retreat was in Florida. Were you still living in California at the time?
Yeah, we were still in L.A., and Mary Jo never came back. That was the only appearance she ever did in, I think, California. She just found the vibe in L.A., contrary to,
right. So, but you made the effort to travel across the country to learn more about this psychic medium.
Oh, yeah. Fortunately, I had the resources and time at the time, and that's what I try to do, is to really find out in every aspect, because this gets down to the larger question of what one believes to be true.
Yeah.
From the top down. And most people they're so busy with their lives and raising families and with their work that they don't have the time to really investigate things thoroughly. And so they make decisions just based on what they hear or people who they agree with what they say. But I try to put all of that to the side and make up my own mind from my direct experience.
I want to remind folks, we're talking with Martin Sawa tonight. He is the author of his memoirs, actually, and the book is called The Other Side of Success. And the part of the book that we're talking about is just a very small part. Martin's story is varied and diverse. There are a lot of parts in this book that don't have to do with the supernatural or the paranormal. We're focusing on those paranormal parts tonight, but the entire book is really about Martin's life journey, and it's quite fascinating. Martin, you got to know Mary Jo on this retreat. Tell us a little bit about who she was and where her influences came from.
She grew up in Tennessee, and like other of who I would consider highly skilled intuitives who I've either met or have, researched, usually discovered this gift at a very young age. And they would usually the gift would be suppressed by their parents or guardians. And in the case of, like, when Anita had, similar gift, put it aside because it could cause problems. So that's what Mary Jo did. But she began to read about Edgar Casey, who was born, I don't know, probably 150 miles away in Kentucky. And I'm sure most of your listeners have heard the name. But
of course, yeah.
He's probably
talked
America's foremost seer or psychic. Or, whatever you want to call it. And she really identified with him because he read the Bible. He read the whole Bible every year and taught Sunday school. So that kind of gelled with her, but she still suppressed the gift until, I think, in her early 20s. And again, that's not uncommon. Just felt that this was her calling. And that's when she began to, do readings and whatnot.
As you started to understand what this all meant, what a medium was, and how someone like Mary Jo actually did act as a conduit to the other side, in the book you describe a medium like that as a radio, which I found to be a great description and a great perspective. Tell us how you make that comparison, because I think it's quite insightful.
Mary Jo's, she had what she called her guides. And these are spiritual beings and who would provide the advice that she in turn would provide to her clients or her listeners. And that's why I sort of pictured her as a radio, the message or the content comes from another source. But she is the medium through which it passes, or the intermediary. And like a radio, sometimes the reception is very clear, at other times it's very spotty. And her gift is the ability to translate from the language of the guides, which appears to her as images or numbers or symbols or letters in her mind's eye. And then to take that and fashion and try to interpret what that means and communicate it to me in English that I understand. And I think at least some of the other, again, highly skilled psychics probably operate in much the same way. And they're not 100% accurate, and probably not close to that. But that's like in any skill set that deals with the gray areas. So like I mentioned in my book, the top traders who trade stocks or commodities, other markets, are only right slightly more than half the time. So it's that comes kind of with that territory. But when they're right, they're really right. So I likened her to a radio, and our sessions again were I didn't ask her what was going to happen to me or predict the future or anything, but to deal with life events and people who have passed, and sometimes people who are living, and how I can better deal with them and live my life in a better way.
About halfway through the book, you come across chapter 13. The title of that chapter is No Last Words, and this is a very important moment in your life and a very tragic night of your life. Tell us what happens and what you describe in chapter 13.
Anita and I, we were getting ready to go out for dinner with some friends, and we were running late, and she was in the bathroom, putting on her makeup and getting dressed, and I was in my office study, and I called out to her that, we better get going, and then she didn't answer. I called out a few more times, and then went, she was in the master bathroom, and called to her, and still no answer, so I tried to open the door, but it wouldn't open. There was something blocking it. And then I kept pushing and pushing, and finally I pushed it open, and she was just lying naked on the floor. And there's nothing that prepares you for a moment like that.
Right.
There's just nothing that prepares you. And so I pulled her out into the bedroom and tried to revive her and called 911, and I didn't know at all what was happening. And then the medics came, and they brought the paddles out and did their best, but she was gone. And then 2 hours later, the coroner came and wheeled her out the door. So there I was.
I mean, first of all, that's an experience that no one, as you said, is ever prepared for it, and no one wishes it on anyone because it's just horrific. And I'm sorry, my condolences, obviously, because that's something that obviously, regardless of how long ago it happens, it lives with you forever. But at a point, Martin, you started to draw some strength from your relationship with Mary Jo. When did that start to happen for you after your loss of Anita?
Well, immediately afterwards, it took a week for the memorial service and burial. So people who dealt with the death of a loved one know you're kind of just busy trying to manage that. And then after that's finished, then you're home alone.
Right.
And it got pretty bad, and I had suicidal thoughts. And fortunately, my daughter, who I was very close with, at the time she was in her early 20s, she would come visit and call every night, and I think she got me over the roughest part just to at least pause and figure out what I was going to do. I had called my partner in work and just told him I wouldn't be coming in for a while. And I had a good partner because he kind of carried the load for quite some time. And then I waited for the coroner's report, and it turned out that Anita had an enlarged heart, what they call hypertrophic cardiomyopathy. And she never knew what hit her. She just literally dropped dead.
Wow.
And then, as I said in the book, at that point, I knew how she died, but I didn't know why. So that's when I called Mary Jo. And she comforted me and told me what had happened to Anita and that she was fine and she was on the other side. And then she told me that now I needed to sort of get myself together on the earth plane. And then I would know when it was time to talk again, and that's when I should call her back. So that gave me some comfort, but it took me some time before I dealt with what had just happened. And the grief, and then I just got absorbed in studying death and other things. And to Mary Jo's credit, one of the things that appealed to me from the beginning when I first met her was she didn't try to push her work. Yeah, even when we did sessions, she only recommended maybe 2 a year, just so I wouldn't use it as a crutch. And so, again, now she told me to get back on my feet. And then we had another call, and this was a couple months later, and then that's when I really reconnected with Anita.
Before you
and
get
she moderated our conversation.
Yeah, before you get into that,
that's when I determined that love in a relationship can survive physical death.
Before you get into too much detail on that second call, was it the first call you had with Mary Jo that she mentioned the rings and the rings?
Yeah, but I didn't know what she had meant at the time, and then I looked and I read the autopsy report and the police report, and they didn't mention any jewelry, and Anita always wore, multiple rings on her fingers and, gold chains and other things. So, but I just let that go. And it wasn't until later that, I realized that. And came up in the second call.
And in the second call, you actually, using Mary Jo as an intermediary, you actually had conversation with Anita, right?
Yeah, it's the way this works. And again, I don't know for your listeners, the ones that have dealt with psychics, but I know there are some other ones that it kind of works in the same way. They like the radio. They're getting different messages, and it's not like you say, "Gee, I want to go talk to my mom" or something. Frequently, the more you want to talk to someone who has passed, it's almost like it's the less likely they're going to show up.
Right.
There's like other spirits, people from your past, loved ones, but even sometimes people who you don't even, not sure who they are, who kind of are vying to talk. and so Mary Jo has no control, and whoever talks the loudest or effectively shows up first, that's what she goes with until that message or communication has kind of exhausted itself. And then she waits for the next one. But in Anita's case, she effectively pushed everybody to the side. And this came up in a future call with a different psychic I have, but she described what life was like for her and gave me assurances that our love wouldn't die. And the main thing about each of these sessions, as it was the first time we met Mary Jo, is that she'll reveal something of such a secret nature that no one else could possibly know, and that's kind of the proof or the signal that you're dealing with someone who is truly that skilled.
Didn't Mary Jo describe Anita as being a sunflower, open and bright where she was now? Yeah.
Anita was happy in her new life, but again, it was her job was, I was kind of her project on the earth plane, to straighten me up morally and ethically. And so she was doing that in the next life. And she had the choice, Mary Jo said, and this was in our first call, to kind of, on the carousel of life, to grab the brass ring and transition or to come back. And she made the decision to transition because she always lived more in the spiritual plane and felt like, the physical body and all the problems of this earth, were just kind of dragging her down.
And at first you felt a little put off by that, didn't you?
Well, yeah, because she was somewhat finished, but not totally finished. But then I said, oh, that's kind of selfish of me. And it's her life, and she's doing great work. And I got over it.
Tell me about the rose petal, because Mary Jo told you about the rose petal.
Yeah, well, that was the, kind of the sign in the second call. And Anita was always kind of trying to educate me on the Bible and explaining different verses. And so Mary Jo said she left your rose petal in the Bible, and I hadn't touched her Bible since she passed. And, sure enough, there it was, and along with notes in the margins to me, I guess anticipating her transition on how it would apply to my life and behavior and so forth. So
I don't want to make any assumptions. Was the rose petal and the notes to you in the Bible, were they something that Anita did prior to her passing, or do you think that was done after she passed?
Yeah, no, it was, I don't know when.
Okay.
But yeah, it was done. I don't know if I don't know if she really had any foreknowledge.
Oh, that was going to be my next question.
Of her death, because it happened so suddenly, and she never talked about it, so she may not even have known she had the problem.
So this was...
it was things that were just put in place, and then later on achieved significance.
Yeah, so this is something she just did as a matter of course.
Yeah.
And then they were significant after the fact. When you were having these sessions with Mary Jo and you were connecting to Anita through Mary Jo, did you feel Anita's presence almost in a physical way?
No, not on the calls. I was just so, and I'm always nervous because you don't know what's going to happen.
Sure.
It may turn out well, but it may not. Or she may not show up, or who knows what. And I try to compose questions but you really can't guide the conversation. So I didn't even think about that. But later on, I had an experience, and it wasn't through Mary Jo, but where what you described truly happened.
You were obviously quite struck by the sessions you had with Mary Jo, and you got some significant corroboration that Mary Jo was in fact communicating to Anita based on some of the things she said. But you still decided you wanted to see if you could get similar results with another medium. Why did you decide to do that, and what were the results that you got?
Well, this was years after her passing, and I guess it's still just my life had changed. I wasn't living in this world with Anita, where I was exposed to what I call the world of the unseen, which kind of includes everything outside the sort of physically or scientifically verifiable world. And I was back at work. I was doing better in terms of my personal development, but and again, when you're not in the world, you become more worldly, and I just said, well, what if this whole thing was just my imagination? And I'm telling myself what I want to hear, and Mary Jo, while she's well-meaning, maybe just on a subconscious level, is kind of guiding me. Who knows? So I tried to think of a way of proving it out more, like a peer-reviewed experiment.
Sure.
And so I thought I would find another psychic, and just to see what would happen. And I researched and talked to a few and vetted and found one who I, by reputation, I thought would be pretty skilled. And so we set up that call, and again, I'm nervous because I don't know what I'm going to hear and why am I even doing this. And it was, when it started, it was like we had never left off. Anita, again, pushed everybody else out of the way, and we just kind of almost resumed our last conversation through this radio. And at that point, I said, this is, I don't care what anybody else thinks or believes. This is part of reality. And
after these experiences, Martin, what did anything change of your view of death or what happens to us after we leave this physical world?
Yeah, I was one of those people that wasn't like a hardened atheist or non-believer or a hardened skeptic. I was always open to evidence, but again, just never thought about these kind of things that much. So by that time, I had started to regain my faith, and that's a whole other story. And so it kind of dovetailed with my formulating a worldview that is predicated on certain key beliefs. And I was just rereading today the life of Martin Gardner. I don't know if the name means anything to your listeners, but he was considered the dean of skeptics. He was a polymath, taught science, was an expert in literature, and really created the movement, the science skeptical movement. But towards the end of his life, after he wrote an autobiography, he revealed that he believed in a personal God, he believed in prayer, and he believed in an afterlife. And I found that kind of amazing. And that rubbed some of his acolytes the wrong way, but here's someone who spent literally his entire life, and he lived into his 90s, trying to debunk what I would call the world of the unseen, and, left us with those beliefs. And that's why I say it's key as to what one believes to be true. If you believe life starts at zero and ends at zero, then you're going to live your life in a certain way. But if you don't, then you're going to live it not just in the immediate reality, but in the world to come. And it's preparing for that transition. And you're going to live your life in a very different way. I think that's about as best as I can express it.
You also write, and I think I've got the phrase as a quote here, you write that something about a programmer external to the system to give it life. You're talking about, are you talking about God?
Yeah, I'm talking, however you want to define God, but for simplicity, a greater power for the good is the way I would put it to start with. And there's, the skeptics, and many of the skeptics are the ones that gain attention on the news feed.
Yeah,
are also pretty strident atheists who anti-theists would be a better way to put it. And a lot of the scientific community is also atheistic. Not making a judgment one way or the other, but just as a fact. So I think preoccupation with the natural world and experiments and measurements that can be done by that, and believing that that's the entirety of reality is, that's their decision, but it doesn't fit with my experiential view of how life works. And if there isn't, to put it in computer language, somebody to write the code, then you wouldn't have life as we know it. It would just be like an automaton, just running and running and running. So all of this research and experience and everything just solidified my worldview as to what I believe to be true.
One of the things that Mary Jo says in one of your sessions with her is that Anita will, I guess the quote is, when your time comes, she will be there to walk you over. How did that make you feel when you heard that?
Well, I kind of lost my breath.
Yeah.
Because it was not just walking over, but it was like, it will feel like it happened just a second after she passed. And so you get in the whole area of, what time means in the world of the unseen. But
do you still have sessions with Mary Jo now?
No, she went on. She still does private session, but she's been doing more group work. Her son is a psychologist, and they do, more conventional workshops together. And she's still is active, but more so in group sessions and in the process of healing and overcoming suffering.
Some people,
we still are in touch. She read the book, liked it, but every once in a while we'll do a call, but not that frequently.
Some people feel that over time, when they do this enough with a Mary Jo that's in their lives, they start to be able to recognize the communication and the signs themselves, and they can actually practice that without an intermediary, without a Mary Jo, without a medium. Do you feel like you've done that? Are you able to communicate with Anita without the help of Mary Jo?
Not in the same way. I think people have certain levels of innate skill and potential, but clearly, and that was the whole reason why I went further. There's just a handful of people that are truly skilled, and I wanted to get information at that level rather than kind of struggle to develop the talent, if in fact I had a talent in myself.
We are getting close to being out of time here. I want to ask you about a couple other parts of your life experience that you talk about in the book briefly. One of the things you mentioned in the beginning of our conversation, Martin, is that your parents were immigrants from Ukraine. They lived through a very, very tumultuous time in Europe, obviously World War II. They lived under Hitler. They lived under Stalin. And one of the things you talk about learning from them is the lessons of socialism. Given what we're going through in this country right now and the discussions that we're having as a nation, what are your thoughts on the lessons of socialism?
I have to honestly say I never thought in my lifetime I'd live to see what I'm seeing now.
Yeah.
And one of the worst features, it's very difficult to even have a conversation. A good friend of mine who was offered one of the praise quotes in the book, he said that, and he deals in the political world in the Beltway, to have a conversation, you need two things. One, some agreement on what's factually true, and two, a mutual respect. And that is so hard to find. It's whatever position people have, it's I'm right and you're evil. So
yeah,
it's hard to have a conversation, particularly when there's no common ground. My parents lived in Ukraine during the years preceding and during World War II. And the area between Berlin and Moscow was the scene of the greatest murder of civilians in human history.
That's right.
By Hitler and Stalin.
Yep.
Primarily. It doesn't get any worse than that.
That's right.
When I look at what people regard as harsh today, I just marvel at human gullibility. So, I wouldn't believe that in the world that we live in the country we live in,
yeah,
that this would be happening, but it is, and we'll see how it unfolds.
Well, you make a really, really important point there. In many ways, many generations in this country just haven't really known any kind of significant hardship, and they don't have that perspective to help guide them and make them appreciate what they do have. And that's a lot of the basis from where much of this comes from, in my estimation.
And a lot of the rhetoric is straight out of the Soviet playbook.
Oh, it
almost
sure
word
is.
for word.
It sure is. It's amazing. It is absolutely amazing. I happen to do another program as well that is more political in nature, and we talk about this significantly, and that's why I was interested in your perspective. Another thing that you talk about in the book, obviously we just went through another unprecedented situation, a series of events in this country with the pandemic and then the lockdowns, which have changed everything. But you talk about it from a real estate perspective as well. What kind of changes do you see, maybe immediately, and then as time ticks on here a little bit as a result of the lockdowns and the pandemic?
My specialty was commercial real estate, which is everything sort of other than residential owned real estate. And in that world, it was already going through major changes, and before the COVID hit,
yeah.
And I think COVID accelerated changes that were already happening and just speeded them up. But there have been winners and losers depending on the type of property. In industrial properties, because of the logistics and the demand, logistical demand, they improved during COVID, as did life sciences and health-related. Others, like retail, which were bricks and mortar retail, which were already on a downward spiral, just accelerated that. And the office building is the one where no one is quite sure what's going to happen. Certainly, the work from home is going to take a toll, and other factors already in place. But it may change kind of the whole landscape of what an office building is and its function in the coming years. So
yeah,
it'll be interesting to see.
I am a bit of an investor myself, and one of the things that I said prior to the pandemic is that malls and commercial real estate, retail commercial real estate, has a real uphill climb in any future that we can predict at this point. And then post COVID, you look at it and it's even grimmer for those particular types of property. I can't imagine. I owned a bunch of radio stations for a long time, and my revenue source was local retailers as advertisers, and the internet started putting them out of business a long time ago, and this just accelerated it, at warp speed, basically. So that's got to be a tough market. As we go back
to add insult to injury, Amazon is buying some of these old malls.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And converting them to distribution centers. So wow. If that's not death and rebirth.
Martin, again, your story is amazing. A lot of amazing life experiences. In the paranormal part of it is particularly of interest to our audience here, because that's what we talk about a lot on here. But what do you want people to walk away with after they've read your book, your story?
Well, I hope they enjoy it. My goal was to inform, move, and entertain. And if they can relate to the characters and feel some of what I felt, then I feel I've done my job. On kind of a secondary level, I'd like to just provoke in your listeners the questions, the big questions, life questions we discussed tonight, particularly what you believe to be true. And when I mentor with people, whether business or life coaching, that's the first question I ask, because from that follows everything else. If you act contrary to your beliefs, or you're in a job you don't like, or you're in a situation you don't understand, or you don't know what you believe, so you have no direction. So what do you believe to be true from the top down? And today, when you turn on the gadget or the TV, and most of what you see and hear is fake or not true. I guess the best way to describe it is Ernest Hemingway gave advice to writers. He said the most essential gift for a good writer is to have a built-in shock-proof shit detector. And maybe with that, I'll close it.
Well, I've got one more question for you, and then we can let you go. But there are people that are experiencing grief all of the time, and some of them may be considering reaching out to someone like a Mary Jo. What is your advice to folks who might be experiencing some grief and might be in search of some help from their Mary Jo, or from a person like Mary Jo?
Be very careful. But when you're in a grief state, you're just emotionally open and less protective of yourself. And so you need to be very cautious, because, again, I believe there are a lot of people who will try to take advantage of the situation. And there is no one means of vetting a psychic. But I would recommend they talk to several and then not make any decision, like Mary Jo basically forced me to wait until they get past the initial grief state. And then they're in more of a mindset to kind of objectively absorb the advice that a skilled intuitive can give them.
Final question, where can people find the book? It's called The Other Side of Success. Where do people pick it up?
The easiest is to go straight to my website, martinsawa.com, MartinSawa.com, and there you can find it available online through Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and other booksellers, as well as links to social media. And I'd love it if they have any questions or read the book and have comments, just via the website to drop me a line.
Well, thank you for being with us tonight, Martin, and thank you for sharing your story. It's very personal, and your grief is obvious when you tell the story, and it's a message of hope in a lot of ways, and we appreciate you sharing it with us.
Well, thank you for having me on.
Beyond Reality Paranormal is hosted by JV Johnson and produced by Orion Palmer and Slick Eddie Edwards. Like us on Facebook and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Please consider supporting the program either through your podcast platform, click on the link in the description, or on Patreon at Joha Productions. If you'd like to be a guest on Beyond Reality Paranormal, or you have a recommendation for a guest, contact our producer, Slick Eddie Edwards. Eddie is spelled with a Y at slickeddieedwards@gmail.com.